In episode 1, we talked about the invisible war. In episode 2, we showed you how China bought the world with infrastructure. In episode 3, we revealed why Taiwan could trigger World War III. Today, we're going to talk about the weapon that's more powerful than any military, more destructive than any bomb, and more strategic than any piece of territory. Money, specifically the US dollar. For over 70 years, the dollar has been the world's reserve currency. That status has given America an extraordinary privilege, the ability to print money that the entire world needs and uses. It's funded the American military. It's financed endless government deficits. It's made America rich beyond measure. But that privilege is ending. China is working systematically to destroy dollar dominance. They're building alternative payment systems. They're convincing countries to trade in Yuan instead of dollars. They're launching digital currencies that could make the dollar obsolete. And it's working. The dollar's share of global reserves is falling. More countries are trading without dollars. The system that has powered American wealth and influence for generations is collapsing. This is the story of the greatest financial shift in modern history, the story of how China is staging a silent coup against American economic power, and why, when the dollar falls, American dominance falls with it. This is episode 4, the currency coup. Let's start with a question most people never think about. Why does the world use dollars? Think about it. When Saudi Arabia sells oil to Japan, neither country is the United States. But the transaction happens in dollars. When Brazil buys machinery from Germany, they settle in dollars. When airlines buy planes from Airbus in Europe, they pay in dollars. Why? What makes American currency so special that the entire world revolves around it? The answer lies in a hotel in New Hampshire in 1944. World War II is ending. Allied leaders meet in Bretton Woods to design the post-war financial system. Britain is bankrupt. Europe is destroyed. The Soviet Union is hostile. Only America emerges powerful and intact. The delegates decide the US dollar will be the anchor of global trade. Every major currency will be pegged to the dollar, and the dollar will be backed by gold, $35 per ounce, fixed and guaranteed by the US government. This is the birth of dollar dominance, and it's brilliant for America because now the entire world needs dollars to trade, which means every country needs to hold dollar reserves, which means constant demand for dollars, which means America can print money without facing the consequences that would cripple other nations. Here's how it works. When Germany prints too many Deutsche Marks, inflation explodes. When Brazil prints too many reals, their currency collapses. But when America prints dollars, the world absorbs them because everyone needs dollars for international trade. This is what French Finance Minister Valéry Giscard d'Estaing called America's exorbitant privilege in the 1960s. The ability to run massive budget deficits, fund endless wars, and finance enormous government spending, all without the economic discipline required of other nations. The system gets even better for America in 1971. President Nixon ends the gold standard. Dollars are no longer backed by gold. They're backed by nothing, just faith in the US government and the strength of the American economy. Other countries should have revolted, but they didn't, because by then, the entire global financial system was built on dollars. Oil was priced in dollars. International debt was denominated in dollars. Central banks held their reserves in dollars. Changing the system would be too disruptive, too expensive, too risky. So the world accepted it, and America reaped the rewards. The US government borrows trillions of dollars at artificially low interest rates because foreign countries park their money in US Treasury bonds, considered the safest asset in the world. American companies trade globally without currency risk because everyone uses dollars. American consumers buy imported goods cheaply because the strong dollar increases purchasing power. This system has transferred trillions of dollars of wealth to the United States. It's not an exaggeration to say that American prosperity for the last 50 years has been built on dollar dominance. But here's the catch. This privilege only works as long as the world trusts the dollar, as long as countries believe in American power, as long as there's no alternative. China is building that alternative. March 2023, Saudi Arabia, America's closest Middle Eastern ally for 80 years, announces something that should have made front-page news around the world. but most Americans never heard about it. Saudi Arabia agrees to sell oil to China in yuan, not dollars, yuan. This is seismic because oil is the foundation of dollar dominance. Since the 1970s, oil has been priced exclusively in dollars. This system, called the petrodollar, means every country buying oil needs to hold dollars. It creates automatic global demand for U.S. currency. When Saudi Arabia sells oil for yuan, that system cracks. It means China can buy oil without needing dollars. It means Saudi Arabia accepts yuan as payment. It means the petrodollar monopoly is breaking. And Saudi Arabia isn't alone. Russia started selling oil in yuan in 2022 after U.S. sanctions cut them off from the dollar system. The United Arab Emirates has signed yuan-denominated oil deals. Even Iraq, a country the U.S. literally invaded and occupied, is now trading oil in yuan with China. Why are these countries abandoning the dollar? Because China is their largest customer. China is the world's biggest oil importer. They buy more oil than anyone else. And they're offering a deal. Trade with us in our currency, and we'll keep buying your oil, investing in your countries, and not interfering in your politics. For oil exporters, especially authoritarian regimes, this is tempting. Trading with China means less dependence on America, less exposure to U.S. sanctions, less vulnerability to American political pressure. But oil is just the beginning. China is systematically building alternatives to the dollar across every sector of global trade. In 2015, China launched the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, a direct competitor to the World Bank and IMF. Over 100 countries joined, including key U.S. allies like the UK, Germany, Australia, and South Korea. China now has a parallel development bank that doesn't require dollar-denominated loans. In 2016, China launched the Yuan oil futures market in Shanghai. Now oil can be priced in yuan, not just traded in yuan. The pricing mechanism, one of the dollar's key advantages, is being replicated. China has signed currency swap agreements with dozens of countries. These agreements allow direct trade between currencies without converting to dollars first. Want to trade Brazilian reals for Chinese yuan? No problem. No dollars needed. The intermediary is being cut out. The scope of this is staggering. In 2010, less than 1% of international trade used yuan. By 2023, yuan accounts for over 5% and growing rapidly. That might not sound like much, but remember, the dollar's dominance took decades to build. China is dismantling it in years, and they're accelerating. In 2023, China and Brazil announced all bilateral trade, over $150 billion annually, will be settled in yuan and reals, bypassing the dollar completely. China and France completed the first yuan-denominated liquefied natural gas trade. Argentina and China are using yuan for trade settlement. Every one of these deals is a brick removed from the foundation of dollar dominance, and China is removing hundreds of them every year. But China isn't just building alternatives to the dollar. They're building something potentially more dangerous. A replacement, the digital yuan. A central bank digital currency, or CBDC, that could make physical dollars obsolete. Here's what makes it different from regular money. When you use a credit card, the transaction goes through banks, payment processors, and international networks. These systems are slow, expensive, and, critically, dominated by American companies like Visa, MasterCard, and SWIFT. SWIFT is the global financial messaging system that allows banks to transfer money internationally. Almost every international transaction goes through SWIFT, and SWIFT is based in Belgium, but effectively controlled by the U.S. and its allies. When America wants to sanction a country, cut them off from the global financial system, they block SWIFT access. This is what happened to Russia in 2022. Russian banks couldn't send or receive international payments. The Russian economy was supposed to collapse. It didn't. Why? Because China had already built an alternative, CIPS, the cross-border interbank payment system, China's answer to SWIFT. CIPS allows international transactions in yuan without touching the dollar system. Russia immediately switched to CIPS when SWIFT was cut off. Other sanctioned countries, Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, are using CIPS to bypass American financial control. But the digital yuan takes this further. It's programmable money. The Chinese government can track every transaction in real time. They can control where it's spent, how it's used, even who can use it. It's money with built-in surveillance and control. For authoritarian governments, this is attractive. Track your citizens' spending, prevent capital flight, monitor dissidents. The digital yuan isn't just money, it's a tool of state control. But here's the global implication. If enough countries adopt the digital yuan for international trade, it bypasses not just the dollar, but the entire Western financial system. Transactions happen directly between central banks. No intermediaries, no SWIFT, no American oversight. China is already testing this. They've launched digital yuan pilot programs with the UAE, Thailand, Hong Kong, and Saudi Arabia. They're integrating the digital yuan into Belt and Road infrastructure projects. Remember Episode 2? So that countries borrowing from China can repay in digital yuan. Imagine a world where major economies trade in digital yuan, where oil is bought in digital yuan, where central banks hold digital yuan reserves instead of dollars, where international payment systems run on Chinese technology instead of American. That world is being built right now, and it's happening faster than most people realize. Here's the irony. America is accelerating its own decline. For decades, the U.S. has used dollar dominance as a weapon, financial sanctions, asset freezes, blocking access to the dollar system. It's been incredibly effective, more powerful than military force, less costly than war. But there's a problem with using a weapon too often. Your enemies adapt. Russia was sanctioned in 2014 after annexing Crimea, cut off from Western banks, frozen out of dollar markets. They started building alternatives, partnering with China, developing CIPS, stockpiling gold, reducing dollar reserves. When the U.S. sanctioned Russia again in 2022, far more severely, Russia was ready. Their economy didn't collapse. Their currency stabilized. They kept trading, just not in dollars. Iran has been sanctioned for decades. They've built an entire parallel economy. They trade oil in yuan and gold. They use cryptocurrency and barter systems. They've become experts at operating outside the dollar system. Venezuela, North Korea, Syria, every sanctioned country has learned the same lesson. Dependence on the dollar is a vulnerability, and China is offering them an escape route. Even countries that aren't sanctioned are paying attention. They see how America weaponizes the financial system. They see how quickly the U.S. can freeze assets, block transactions, destroy economies with the stroke of a pen. And they're thinking, what if we're next? Saudi Arabia saw how the U.S. pressured them over oil production. They're hedging by accepting yuan. Europe saw how U.S. sanctions policy sometimes conflicts with European interests. They're quietly developing their own payment systems. India is buying Russian oil at discounted prices and paying in rupees, not dollars. The more America uses the dollar as a weapon, the more countries want alternatives. The more countries want alternatives, the weaker the dollar becomes. The weaker the dollar becomes, the less effective sanctions are. It's a death spiral, and the numbers show it. In 2000, over 70% of global foreign exchange reserves were held in dollars. By 2023, it's down to 58% and falling. That's the steepest decline since dollar dominance began. Central banks are diversifying, buying gold, holding euros, yuan, even yen. Anything to reduce dollar exposure. Because they've learned relying too much on the dollar means giving America control over your economy. This is the paradox of power. The more you use it, the more people resist it. The more people resist, the weaker you become. So what happens when the dollar loses its reserve currency status? What does the collapse look like? It won't be sudden. There won't be a single day where the dollar crashes and everything falls apart. It'll be gradual, incremental. A slow erosion of privilege until one day Americans wake up and realize their wealth has disappeared. Here's how it unfolds. Phase 1. The share of global trade conducted in dollars continues to shrink. More and more countries trade in yuan or euros or their own currencies. American companies face higher transaction costs. Currency volatility increases. Phase 2. Central banks shift more reserves out of dollars and into alternatives. Demand for U.S. Treasury bonds, The foundation of U.S. government borrowing declines. Interest rates rise. The U.S. government faces higher borrowing costs. Phase 3. The U.S. can no longer run massive budget deficits without economic consequences. Every $1 trillion in new spending now causes inflation. The Federal Reserve can't just print money without devaluing the currency. Austerity becomes necessary. Social Security, cuts needed. Medicare, underfunded. Defense spending has to shrink. Infrastructure, can't afford it. The generous government programs Americans expect, all built on cheap borrowing enabled by dollar dominance, become unsustainable. Phase 4. Inflation rises as the dollar weakens. Import prices spike. Everything from cars to electronics to clothes gets more expensive. American purchasing power collapses. The middle class gets crushed. Phase 5. The U.S. economy enters a period of prolonged stagnation. Growth slows. Unemployment rises. Living standards decline. America looks less like a superpower and more like a large struggling economy. This is not speculation. This is the historical pattern when reserve currencies collapse. It happened to the British pound in the mid-20th century. Britain went from global superpower to struggling European economy in a generation. The same will happen to America when the dollar loses its status. And here's the cruel part. Once the process starts, it's almost impossible to stop. Because reserve currency status is about confidence. If countries believe the dollar is weakening, they dump dollars, which weakens the dollar further, which reinforces the belief. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. China knows this. They don't need to destroy the dollar directly. They just need to offer an alternative. If enough countries choose the alternative, the dollar collapse happens on its own. And we're not decades away from this. We're maybe years away. The shift is already happening. It's just not on the evening news, because financial de-dollarization doesn't make for dramatic headlines. But it's happening every day in every trade deal that bypasses the dollar, in every central bank that diversifies reserves, in every country that joins China's financial alternative. So here's where we are. The dollar's dominance is ending. China is systematically building alternatives. Countries are abandoning the petrodollar. The digital yuan is being tested globally. American sanctions are backfiring and accelerating the transition. When the dollar falls, America's ability to fund its government, its military, its social programs, its entire way of life collapses with it. The wealth and power that Americans have taken for granted for 70 years will evaporate. This is the currency coup. Not a sudden attack, not a dramatic crisis, a patient, strategic, systematic dismantling of American financial power. In Episode 5, we're going to talk about another weapon China is wielding against the West. Not infrastructure, not chips, not money, information. TikTok isn't just a social media app. It's a surveillance system. It's a propaganda tool. It's a weapon that collects data on hundreds of millions of Americans and shapes what they see, what they think, what they believe. China controls the information environment of an entire generation, and they're using it to undermine Western democracy from the inside. Episode 5, The Information Empire, coming soon. The currency coup is already complete. We just haven't admitted it yet.